am Abdurrahman. I'm a lecturer at a public university in Kenya. I deliver lectures in computing and informatics. In our last lesson, basically we discussed about user-defined functions, and basically we discussed about the classification of user-defined function. Actually, according to two items, that is whether they take an argument or they take up a return value, we actually classify them into four, and we classify them into type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. So in today's lesson, we are going to talk about the type 1 classification into more details. In that particular journey, we are going to answer the question, what is type 1 user-defined function? And in that particular journey, we are going to take up the definition of type 1, the syntax, and then finally we are going to implement it. So let's start up with the definition of type 1 function. So basically the type 1 function will actually be defined and will take up the following. So it will take up no argument, that is, in the argument part of it, we'll have void. We might write up void or not write up void. So the second part of it, it will take up no return value or no return data type. The meaning of that, basically, we had seen that the primitive data types, they are such as void, int, char, and float. So basically, the only data type which it can take should be void. So with that particular note, we are taking up to the second part of it. We want actually to see what is the syntax of type 1 user-defined function. So the syntax, basically, since it takes out the syntax, basically it is actually data type, and then we have a function name, and then we have opening and closing brackets, and then opening and closing curly bracket, and inside here we'll have the body of the function. Now this particular syntax is very interesting. We should look at here the data type. What data type it can take? Only void. So we'll have a void. And what argument? Argument also will be void. So we might write here void, or leave it empty, or leave it empty. So basically this is actually the syntax of type 1 function. So let's see how we can implement it. So in order to implement, we are going to take up a particular program, and that program basically will tell up the user to enter two numbers in order to add this particular two numbers using up a type 1 function. So basically, what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to write up the body of the function. So that particular body of the function basically will have maybe void, and our function name will call up add, and then we declare up some variables to hold up those particular two numbers. So basically here, what are we going to say? We are going to say maybe int num1, num2, and int sum, and then we are going to bring up at the printf to tell them enter the two numbers. After entering the two number, you have to put up the scanf to capture the two numbers. So the format for specifier will be two of them. If it is an integer, you'll have %d, and then we'll have our num1, our num2. And then basically we are going to do up the other mathematical part of it. So we are going to say our sum is equal to num1 plus num2. And finally we are going to print. So we are going to say printf. What are we printing? We are printing up our sum. So this will be basically the implementation of the user defined type 1 function. So let's see how we can actually do it in a dev C++. So basically we are saying that our function should be of data type void. So we'll have it up a void, and the name was called add, so it should have up a add. So here we are doing up the declaration if you have been following up into our first program. And here we are doing up the recall. We want to call up the function. Now we are calling it in a very basic manner by just putting up their name, and then we terminate. And then the third part of it, what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to define that particular function. So this is the definition of a function, and this particular definition of a function basically will have our body here. So our body will have our int num1, num2, and we have our sum. And then we'll tell our user, to do what? To enter two integers to add. So here basically we are telling our user enter two integer to add. So a user supposed to be having a prompt to enter two integers to add, and then we have to capture it using the scanf. So here we're having a scanf, and basically we have to have a format specifiers. So our format specifier basically will be %d, because all of them they are integers, and %d, and there are two of them. So we have to capture the two of them. And where are we going to store them? We are going to store them in an address of num1, and in an address of num2. After capturing them, what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to do the arithmetic or the adding part of it. So we assign the sum of num1 and num2 to the variable sum. So here we'll have num1 plus num2 assigned to the variable sum, and then basically we are going to print it. We are going to print it on the screen, and we will have these particular words: the sum of the two integers equals to, and we have our format specifier %d, and then we'll have our variable, which is sum. So basically it is the implementation, and when we run this particular program, we're supposed to be prompted according to this to enter two numbers, and then the words the sum of two integers equals to that particular sum. So let's run this particular program. So when we run this particular program, it gives up an error here. Let's see what is an error. It is actually in line 12, whereby we did not terminate, we didn't follow up the rules. So let's now actually compile and run. So when we compile and run, actually we were prompted to say enter two integers to add. So we are entering 40, and after entering 40, we are entering also 50. And actually it says the sum of the two numbers actually of 40 and 50, it is actually 90. So thank you very much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe. And in our next lesson we are going to talk about the user defined type 2 function. Thank you.